Now, as we begin, I'm really excited because we have a very special guest on our show today, and his name is Dr. Carter. He is a clinician, author of Healing in the Wild, and a guide who helps people restore meaningful and integrity after deep, invisible hurts, what he calls moral injury. His work meets people where scans and checklists can't rebuild, identify the connection, and he gives reasons for people to live and want to move on with their life to reach their full potential in life. I'm so glad to have you on the show. I'm really excited about this. Can you tell everybody a little about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, thank you so much, Stacey. It's great to be here. I'm Dr. Carter Check. I'm a U.S. Army veteran. I'm a dad, 5 kids, married. I'm a VA suicide prevention chaplain and a medical ethicist in the VA. Like you said, I'm author of Healing in the Wild, but before any of that, I was a young man shaped by trauma, silence, and survival. And my work today really centers around what I call moral health. And that's helping people heal the unseen wounds of betrayal, grief, and shame that don't show up on scans, but
Yeah.
can change the course of life. And I take people back into the wild, back into the outdoors, not to escape, but really to remember, to listen, and to rebuild. And that's my passion, to companion others until they see not just why they shouldn't die, but why their life is worth living.
That's beautiful. There are so many, percentages nowadays where people go through trauma, they go through different experiences in their life, and it stops them from moving forward. They get stuck with those things that have happened to them, even though it's the past, they can't move on from it. It just haunts them. It just stays in their brain, their subconscious, and and they can't stop thinking about it. And the more they think about it, the worse it becomes, the more anxiety they experience, the more depression that they experience. And as we know, stress leads to anxiety, anxiety leads to stress and depression. And then from there, there is a large percentage of people who do take their lives because they just can't move on from what they've experienced, and it's taken such a toll on their life. So I'm so glad that you're doing this to help people because in society we don't talk enough about suicide. We don't mention it, and people I don't think are aware of the number of people that take their lives each year in different communities because they just can't deal with the trauma anymore.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. One of the most staggering statistics I've ever heard in my work around suicide prevention is that suicide survivors, those that are left after somebody decides to die by suicide, so a dad takes his life and leaves kids, a mom takes her life and leaves a husband. Those survivors are 175% more likely to die by suicide themselves. So when we have the ability to step in the way of a suicide death, we're not just saving one potential life. We're
Yeah,
saving generational lives, you know?
right.
And you're right. It's not talked about enough. There's a lot of stigma around it. A lot of people think, oh, if we talk about suicide, then people are more likely to die by suicide. Here's the thing. Isolation and loneliness are the worst risk factors that are out there, whether it's diagnostic criteria of trauma that leads to something or non-diagnostic. Well, what do you mean by that, Carter? Well, diagnostic is your DSM-5 things, right? Depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, right? Those types of things. Things
Mhm.
that have Z codes. They're in the DSM-5, there's pills that are made for some of these things, right?
Right.
But then on the non-diagnostic side, you have things like helplessness, hopelessness, unworthiness. These aren't
Mhm.
things that show up in scans. These aren't things that have diagnostic codes for them. But I would argue these are probably the things that people deal with the most. And they would say they're underlining those Z code things. But these are the things that cause people to blow their brains out, hang themselves in a tree, right? They're
Yeah.
the things that we talk about less because they don't get as much attention, but when you think about isolation and loneliness, whether that's on the diagnostic side or the non-diagnostic side, they push these things push people to be isolated. Now, not all isolation is bad, Stacey. Some's really good. Sometimes I need to break away and clear my thoughts or,
Yeah.
watch a sunrise, drink a cup of coffee. and recalibrate. That's not the isolation I'm talking about. The
Right.
isolation I'm talking about that gets terrible is when it becomes an avoidance tool, right? When you start avoiding life through isolation, then that leads to loneliness. And loneliness is the worst risk factor of all because
Yeah.
loneliness is introspective. You can't look across a room and see who's lonely. You could be surrounded by 100,000 people and be alone. And what loneliness does in my doctoral dissertation, I did a meta-analysis on 94 different research projects that connected loneliness to suicidality. Okay. And what I
Wow.
found was loneliness is what we call a motivational phase factor. So if you think about pouring gas on a fire, right? Boom. That's what loneliness does to suicidal ideation and behaviors. It becomes
Yeah.
a propellant or an accelerant into those things. So in all of my work, you know what I found? There's only two ways to combat isolation and loneliness:
Hmm.
create community and connection. That's it. Not a
Right.
pill, not a drink, not a formula. Just get people connected in
Yeah.
community to find a sense of purpose, and you are combating suicide.
That is so true. And you also you were talking about earlier about moral injury before the show, and you used the term moral injury. For someone who's hearing that for the first time, what exactly is it? And how is it different from traditional mental health diagnosis?
Yeah, I appreciate that because that's really what I wanted to talk about today. Are the wounds most people never get a chance or
Hmm.
even a language to talk about, right? So in my
Yeah.
book, Healing in the Wild, it's more about recovery. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that got shattered by betrayal, grief, trauma, silence. And it's about the wounds that don't show up on scans, right? The wounds that don't have funerals that often get misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all or ignored, right? These
Right.
are these are what you could call soul wounds or spiritual wounds or however you want to frame it. Honestly, it's more important what you think it is than what I think it is. But I'll tell you what I call this is what I call moral injury. And this needs a different kind of healing because where traditional mental health focuses on diagnosis and treatment, moral health is about meaning and identity and integrity of the self. So I just don't want to help people manage symptoms. I want them to rebuild the framework that gives their life meaning again, right?
Yeah.
Moral injury is simply this: it's a violation of what's right to you. Doesn't matter
Right.
if it was right to me, it's what was right to you. And then that's the deeper truth. We don't stop suicide only by studying death. We
Hmm.
stop suicide by restoring reasons to live. And
Yes.
so we don't treat moral injury with pills alone. We treat it with presence, with
Yeah.
ritual, with reconnection, with truth, right?
Yeah.
And that's why I take people back into the wild, not to escape, but to remember, to listen, and to rebuild. Moral injury is that wound of the soul when what matters most to you is violated. And it's not about fear like PTSD,
Right.
it's about shame. It's about betrayal, probably mostly about disconnection, right? And to contrast that to PTSD, because when moral injury was really highlighted back in 2009, what was happening is you had psychologists and psychiatrists working with veterans in the VA system who were
Yeah.
dealing with PTSD. And PTSD is a fear-based trauma. It's triggered by threat and danger. Okay.
Hmm.
Where moral injury is more of a shame-based trauma, and it's triggered by betrayal, by a loss of trust, by a violation of values, right?
Yeah.
And PTSD would say this, Stacey, it would say, I might not be safe. Where moral injury says, I don't belong anymore, right?
Yeah.
So the best example I can give you is my story. You know, I was 18 years old on the other side of the world as an Army Cav Scout. I was off post with my battle buddy, blowing off some steam. A car came zipping through where cars weren't really allowed to be, right? And
Right.
almost ran us over. And so, you don't have to speak the language of the other country you're in to let somebody know you're pissed off, right? And, they're pissed off because we're in the way, and we're pissed off because they almost ran us over. And so I just, try to push my battle buddy into this bar that was right there and let them go on their way. And, 15 minutes later, we're looking at our watches. It's quarter to three, and I mean 3 a.m. And you know what? You got to be back on post by three because they
Oh,
shut the
wow.
gates. So now we're on the street, we're going back. And as we walk down the street, we get to where their car had been pulled over. They're all outside and they recognize who we are. And now a confrontation starts. And as we're there, we are surrounded by these guys. And one of the guys pulls a knife.
Oh,
And
gee.
he pulls a knife in my battle buddy's blind side. Now, look, you don't have to be a combat trained veteran to react in that situation. But if you are, you're going to react differently. So
Yeah,
guess what? This guy got taken out really quick because nobody's getting stabbed on my watch. Definitely not my best friend. What
right.
ended up happening is the three of the five that attacked us ended up in the hospital, and one of them was the son of a South Korean dignitary.
Mm,
And what was me doing the right thing now became a political opportunity for the army to offer me and my roommate up for prosecution for assault and battery. And here's the thing, in South Korea, assault and battery is a life sentence in prison, and we had three counts.
wow.
So from battalion level down, and for those of you that are not militarily associated, battalion is like your family, it's who you're with all the time. And then you have brigade, which is bigger, and then you have division, which is oversees many brigades. So we're talking, division oversees multiple tens of thousands of soldiers, right? Well, in my family and battalion, um, they knew what happened, they knew our story, and they were supporting us. But division level, they didn't know our family, they didn't know our story. They just knew that this was an opportunity, this was something we needed to allow the system to deal with because of politics or whatever. And so
Yeah.
for 9 months, me and my roommate were wearing an American uniform, serving our country, protecting their country, doing our job. And then every now and then we'd have to put on our dress green and go down to Seoul and go to court. At the end, and I'm talking to you today and I don't look like I'm in a prison, so I think you know the outcome. But the army really abandoned us, and the way the Korean judicial system works is no matter the outcome of a jury, the judge can change the verdict. So the jury actually found us guilty.
Oh,
And
wow.
the jury found us guilty. And then I don't know if you're a football fan or not, but I'm sure you've probably been around it before, where it's the end of the game, your team kicks the field goal to win the thing, and everybody's going crazy. And then all of a sudden, everybody notices, oh, there's a flag on the field, right? There's a flag. There's a flag on the field. Well, that's kind of how it happened. The jury read the verdict. Their side was super excited. You could tell. I didn't know their language, but I knew they were excited. And I knew that was bad for me. Okay.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the judge starts talking and it's like, oh, there's a flag on the play. Well, then the judge starts talking in English. And he thanked me and my battle buddy for serving our country and protecting him and his family. He kind of berated us a little bit for conduct unbecoming, and and even though you're a soldier, you're defending yourself, maybe you could have done this, and which I get it, you got to do something in that sense anyways. But he told us he wasn't going to send us to prison in South Korea, but he was going to deny our ability to ever come back to his country once we left in service. And so
Oh,
I
wow.
actually have an active JAG order against me even now, and I've been out of the military since '97, saying I cannot travel to the country of South Korea. And what had ended up happening is in that altercation, I broke my wrist
Mm.
and I broke my scaphoid in half in it, which ended up where I had to have a cast for 6 months. And so the cast started here, and then it was from here down, and then it was
Oh,
from here down for 6 months. So you can imagine the atrophy in my wrist after 6 months of a cast. Well, what that
oh,
led to
yeah.
was my inability to do a push-up. And push-ups are really important for physical fitness test. And so
Yeah.
my inability to do a push-up, even though I was a squared away soldier, I got accommodations. I was good at what I did, and I wasn't a problem, you
Yeah.
know, outside of, I guess, this situation.
Right.
I felt like I did the right thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I came back stateside, my platoon sergeant that I had at the time just saw me as a defect, as a bad mark on his report because he had a soldier who couldn't do a PT test. And I got hazed for it a lot. Like I got a lot of like standing in front of formation and being belittled and stuff like that. And, you know, and in my lifetime, I was a big time athlete. If I wasn't the first person picked for someone to be on their team, I was the second. So when it
Hmm.
came to feeling unworthy and less than, these were things that were foreign to me. But I
Yeah.
really started to take on this identity of, man, I'm carrying this shame and I don't have a language. And what ended up happening was just years of silence of just kind of struggling. I got out of the military, didn't really want to stay in after experiencing that. That was a loss for me, just like we were talking earlier about that transition from active duty to veteran, you know. There's really not great care in that period of time, and even worse back when I got out. So
Yeah.
I had these years of just silence and this trauma without a language. And then I ended up going through a divorce where I lost my kids and I lost my kids because the system decided it, not because of bad parenting, but
Yeah.
because the mom gets the kids. So here again, a system decided for me, and I feel like I'm doing the right thing, but then I get the wrong outcome. And
Yeah.
what ended up happening is these types of wounds don't show up on scans, right? They don't have funerals and but they bury people alive, and that's how I felt like I was being buried alive. And these are what I would call soul wounds, spiritual wounds. They're compound fractures of the unseen skeletal structure, right?
Yeah.
And they require that same type of healing.
Yeah. Wow, that's an amazing story. That, and it just blew me away when you talked about it. And the scary thing is that there's a lot of people out there that have similar situations that happen to them, but their stories are never told. And they're going through this trauma, they're going through this pain, and they have this inner anger, they have the post-traumatic stress disorder, they have all that stuff that we talked about, and they just don't know how to spiritually just let it go, like you were talking about. They just don't know, what that moral injury is and how severe it is. They feel it inside, but they just don't. Some people just, they know they're not right. They know something's going on. Either they're in denial or they just don't know what to do, and
Yeah.
they live life, in chaos, and it's pretty sad. Now, you've said that we don't stop suicide only by studying death. We stop it by restoring reasons to live. Can you unpack that and explain that more in depth to me?
Yeah, I can. This is kind of like the adaptation of my what I feel like is my purpose in life on this earth, right? And so
Mhm.
as I went through you know, my own morally injurious experience, when I went to the VA for help, nothing existed.
Yeah,
And so, you know, struggling with that and people trying to say, "Oh, you have PTSD." And I'm like, "No, yeah, maybe I suffer from PTSD, but this is
right.
not what I'm dealing with, right?" I started to not just evaluate the situation, but learn to evaluate it in a way where I felt like I was starting to construct a system of care that could
Yeah,
help other people, right? And let me preface that with this. In all of my work around suicide prevention, one of the reasons that it really pushed me to pursue a PhD in healthcare ethics was I needed a research degree. And I needed a research degree for one major reason. All of the attention is given to what leads up to suicide death. Now, I think you
mhm.
would agree with me, Stacey, that I don't think we get great information from dead people on how to live. That's not to
No.
minimize their death. I'm not trying to talk down to suicide. And that information that leads to suicide death is super important. But what I think is really more important is what causes people to continue to live after they've had suicidal ideations. Like, you know,
Hmm.
like the vets that I work with that are flagged high risk, right? We'll work with them for 60 to 90 days. They're flagged. We're giving them extra attention to support life,
Yeah,
not death, right?
Right.
And there's really not a lot of really good data about what supports life. So this really pushed me in my PhD work to start to talk about moral health and to really look at moral health
Yeah.
because moral injury would be an injury to whatever you would conceptualize as being morally healthy. So here was
Right.
my big idea. Mental health is really about symptoms and diagnosis, where
Right.
moral health is more about meaning and identity and like wholeness of the self. So I
Yeah.
really started to lean into these four, what I call four components of moral health: integrity, belonging.
Hmm.
Integrity is really just living in alignment with your values, and trauma
Hmm.
fractures that alignment. When
Yeah.
trauma happens, your values are like, you start questioning everything, including yourself, right?
Yeah.
Belonging, knowing you're not alone is so important. And moral injury isolates, where moral health restores community. And then you've got meaning, remembering why your life matters.
Hmm.
And it's not enough just to stop pain. You need a reason to keep living, right?
Yes. Oh,
And then
yeah.
your voice, finding the courage to speak truth again without shame or fear. So for me, moral health is not about what's wrong with you. It's about what still matters to you. So
Oh,
I
wow.
tell people who suffer moral injury that having a moral injury is not a sign of a defect within you. It's
Hmm.
actually a highlight of the best thing about you because if you weren't hurting, you wouldn't have morals, right? And
Exactly.
so for me, the academy and your purpose, right? What is that for me?
Hmm.
Helping veterans rebuild moral health after betrayal, trauma, and silence. And those are super important because I live to companion others, not to fix them, but to
Hmm.
walk with them until they remember who they are, right? That's it.
Love
Because
that.
most people have what they have in them, you know. I'll tell you something. I ask three questions to every high risk veteran I work with, and these are so important. If you're listening today, especially the third question, you're going to be able to use this in so many situations and not just around suicidality. So I'm about to give you a super awesome practical tool that I use to keep people from blowing their brains out. Okay?
Yeah.
The first question, where do you draw your strength from?
Hmm.
That's I'm just trying to see what makes you resilient, right?
Yeah.
The
Hmm.
second question is, what does your support system look like outside of the VA, right? Because
Hmm.
that's super important. I can look at your chart and I can see if you're taking your meds, meeting your mental health appointments, if you're in groups, what you're doing in the system. But what does that support look like outside? Again, resiliency and protective factors. But here's the most important question, Stacey. On a scale of 0 to 10, this is what I ask every single one of them. On a scale of 0 to 10, zero being not important at all, 10, it's the most important thing in the world. How important is it for you to live? And the average answers, if I've asked this question multiple thousands of times, okay? The average answers are probably 5 and 0. The largest percentage. I'd say more than 80% are 5 and 0, okay? And when they tell me they're a 5, I ask them to help me understand why they're not a 1, and I
Hmm.
shut up. I shut up because whatever is in them that's keeping them alive,
Right.
whatever they say, it doesn't matter what it is, whatever that is what we need to focus on because that is why they're still here, right? If they tell me
Yeah.
they're a 0, I just say, help me understand why you're still living. Same
Hmm.
process. I don't say, how can I get you to a 10? Because getting to a 10 for someone who is stuck in shame and trauma is impossible. Don't do it. You
Yeah.
push them backwards. You might as well just give them a loaded gun, to be quite honest.
Yeah.
I know that's an extreme, but it's the truth, right?
Hmm.
And but when you listen to what they say and you just lean into that, that's what we call presence.
Yeah.
That is support. The greatest thing that you can give an individual in crisis is presence.
Hmm.
And and that's why nature is so important to me in this process, right?
Yeah.
Nature isn't an escape, it's a co-therapist. It
Right.
creates space for vulnerability and truth. And most people just need space when they're in trauma. And guess what? Nature usually doesn't mess it up like we do. We can say the wrong things, we can act the wrong way, but a sunrise doesn't ever mess up. It
Yeah.
always shows us that a little bit of light can start to dispel darkness. So
Yeah.
as a co-therapist, the trees don't interrupt. The
Hmm.
river doesn't condemn you, and the
Right.
wild just simply receives you.
Yeah.
And in that area of silence, when you're in the wild, silence isn't empty, it's
Yeah.
safe, right? When you
Oh
start to
yeah.
hear the birds, you hear the woods wake up, you notice nature, right? And your perspective shifts because the outdoors reminds us that we're part of
Hmm.
something bigger than our wounds. I
Yeah.
don't know anybody who's ever stood up on top of a mountain, looking down below at the beauty, or standing at the edge of the beach, checking out the ocean, that ever thought to themselves, my wounds are bigger than what I'm viewing. It just, I've never seen that, right?
Yeah.
And personally, veterans who stayed silent in clinics
Hmm.
usually find their voice beside a fire, a camp
Mm.
on a campsite.
Yeah.
And sometimes the fire gives gives permission that four walls never could. I
Hmm.
think you know what I'm. I think you know exactly what I'm talking about. And there's plenty
Yeah.
of people who are watching this that know that too. Now, here's the thing. Here's the truth. Nature doesn't erase your pain, but it does give you a place to lay it down.
Hmm.
And healing doesn't always happen in a clinic, but sometimes it happens with mud on your boots and even smoke in your lungs sitting next to a campfire.
Right.
I would much rather smell like a campfire and feel like I'm being healed than smell great wearing a mask knowing that I'm not.
Right. I agree 100% with that. Yeah. When I go out into nature, there is a feeling of serenity that I don't feel anywhere else. Even when I walk the dogs, to be honest with you, as soon as I go outside and I'm walking on the grass or I'm just like seeing the sunlight and I'm smelling the air, I get a different feeling than being around four walls.
Oh yeah.
It's like that inclusion. It's like this is all I have. This is all that my life contains. And then as soon as you go out into nature, all of a sudden you're exposed to this whole big world that you forgot about because you're contained in those four walls. And it's really
Yes.
changing that mentality, changing your mindset, changing the way you look at things and really appreciating, what's out there and what could be, and it's that could
Yes.
be, that really gets us, moving because when there's hope, anything could be possible.
Yes. Yes. 100%. And I think that anybody who's listening to this, they know that place in nature that speaks to them, that calls to them. Why do people want to go to the beach on their vacation? Why do people want to go hiking up in the mountains? Like, what is it about nature that calls to us? And I think
Mhm.
it reminds us that we're not alone, that
Yeah.
there's something deeper involved. And honestly, it gives an opportunity for the automatic negative thoughts that we have to be squashed, because we're not thinking about that stuff as much when we're in those moments. And if we can learn how to squash the negativity, I say this: healing isn't forgetting, it's
Mhm.
remembering differently.
Yeah.
And that's the key. We can't go back and change experiences. And let's admit something right now. Time does not heal all wounds,
Hmm.
right? Whoever said that was not speaking authentically. But what
Hmm.
time does is it does give us an opportunity to be strengthened in those areas.
Yes.
I have a mentor who says one of the greatest moves that an individual can make in life is to take unbearable pain and turn
Hmm.
it into livable disappointment.
Yeah.
And I know livable disappointment doesn't sound like much of a prize unless it's
Hmm.
weighed against unbearable pain.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I think nature, and authenticity do. They
Hmm.
help you transform unbearable pain into livable disappointment.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Now, what are some of the signs someone may be carrying unseen wounds, or even if everything looks fine on the outside, how can you sometimes tell? Because I was on this group one time and I was in a panel and I was helping people with disabilities and disorders. And this young man, he was, the mother was sitting next to me and and her son had a disability. But it got to the point where he couldn't deal with this disability anymore. And one day she walked in his room and he hadn't come out in a while. And she opened the door up and he was hanging by a rope. He had hung himself.
Mm,
And for years, she blamed herself for not knowing, not seeing the signs, not seeing those symptoms. But
yeah.
you know what? They always say that the ones that sometimes are the most serious about committing suicide are the ones that show no signs. But for some people, like parents or loved ones, they may take blame for that because they think that they should have saw the signs.
Yeah, I think you bring up a couple of really good things I want to touch, and then I'll go into some of those signs.
Yeah.
A lot of times around suicide death, you'll see improvement in someone
Hmm.
before they die. And what do you mean by that? People will say, "Wow, that I just saw Tom or Rich or Sue, and they really looked like they were doing okay." And what happens is when someone makes the decision to die by suicide, there's I'm going to call it false hope. That's my word. But even
Yeah.
false hope can show up as hope when there's no hope at all, right? So there might
Yeah.
be a sign of improvement. Another thing that I want to highlight what you said is normally what individuals who are left, the suicide survivors, often say, and they often struggle with what was unspoken. It's always what they didn't get to say that bothers them the most. And a really cool practical tool that you could use if you're helping support somebody who is a suicide survivor is do this. Get some index cards, sit with them, and let them write down the things that they didn't get to say. And then tie those to some balloons and let those balloons go up in the air as a symbol or a point of contact, where someone can start to just step. A moment to lament and step into mourning. It's just movement. Look, I don't. Some people would say, "Well, that's just littering." I get it. It's index cards, it's balloons. We know that they're just going up in the air, and the balloons are going to pop, and those index cards are going to. But sometimes people just need that little moment, that little fragment of hope connected to what they didn't get to say. Okay, I think that's super important. I also think it's important to say this. Most people who die by suicide outside of the realm of a murder suicide, those people really feel like they're jumping on a grenade, saving everybody around them. They feel like they're a burden. They feel like the world would be better without them. And they really genuinely feel like they are helping everybody else when they take their own life. Now, I don't agree with that. I think that's an ultimate lie that leads to their death. And I believe that the blast radius of a suicide goes far further than any natural grenade. So they think that they're protecting and they're actually hurting even worse. But that needs to be said because I think most people really feel like they're helping everybody out, Stacey. Now,
Yeah.
what are those signs? Number one, isolation. People who are pulling away from family, pulling away from friends, and community because you feel like no one could understand, right? So these are
Hmm.
the people where you're in the room, but you're not really there. You're isolated. Shame and silence. Struggling to talk about what happened or believe in your story is too heavy. When you encounter people in their trauma and they just struggle talking about it, believe the story's too heavy, too ugly, too much for others to hear.
Yeah.
Because the heaviest things we carry are often the ones we never name, right?
Hmm.
Loss of meaning is another sign. When people start asking, what's the point? When work, when faith or life feel hollow, when the world keeps moving, but you can't find a place in it, That's a sure sign that you're probably moving into some ideation around suicide. There's an identity fracture.
Yeah.
People feeling like the person you are now doesn't match who you were before your betrayal or your trauma or your grief. And when people say things like, I just don't recognize myself anymore, that's a sure sign that someone is at fracture in their identity and they are struggling to find purpose. Anger and bitterness aren't always bad, right? I mean, I think anger can be pretty healthy, and maybe a
Yeah.
sense of bitterness sometimes is healthy too, right? As long as it doesn't
Mhm.
hurt people, right?
Yeah.
But when there's this deep sense of injustice or betrayal or rage that doesn't go away, that's not just anger. That's a sense that something sacred was violated. So when you see that, that's the type of stuff that leads to violence. That's the type of stuff, and that violence doesn't have to be directed towards other people. The most
Right.
violent act of yourself is suicide death, right?
Yeah.
Um, Spiritual distress, when people are really wrestling with God and faith and their moral compass, and they're feeling abandoned or cut off from what once gave them strength, right? You know, and the last one I would say, and there's probably a whole lot more that we could talk about, but compulsive numbing,
Hmm.
turning to alcohol, turning to substances, turning to work or busyness to avoid sitting in the wound. That's what I would call compulsive numbing.
Hmm.
And when somebody experiences that, they're probably having some signs of these unseen wounds, right? And look, remember, these wounds don't bleed, but they break. They don't
Hmm.
show up on scans, but they show up in silence and they show up in distance and in the way you stop believing your life has meaning.
Right.
Look for them.
It's a really good answer. That's a really good answer because I think a lot of people they don't know what those unseen wounds are, and it's good to know the symptoms so you could react before it's too late. Now, you take people into nature as a part of healing. Why do you do that?
Um, I do it because healing is always present.
Hmm.
Nature is always present to you. All you have to do is show up, right? Um, I think that, when I first went to grad school after my divorce, one of the most important things I ever did was not schedule for my classes. It was actually I became a river guide. And what happened is on the river, I started to learn some things. I learned that the flow of the whitewater goes in one direction, and you can fight it all you want, but you better learn how to navigate downriver. And that's
Yeah.
how life is, right? That's how life is. Um, and I learned that there are things far more powerful than my thought processes. Trust me, you get caught in a whitewater hydraulic underwater, you're not thinking about who did you wrong, what betrayal you had, what bad experience you had. You're thinking about one thing: when am I going to get air into my lungs? Right.
Yeah. Hmm.
And I'm not saying, go down to the river and stay under the water until you have an epiphany about life. What I
Hmm.
will say is you don't drown by getting in the river. You drown by staying in the river.
Right.
And why the wild? Nature receives what people can't.
Hmm.
The trees don't interrupt you. The river doesn't condemn you. The wild doesn't ask you to perform. It just holds space for you to tell the truth. And
Yes.
that's because silence isn't empty, it's safe. And in a clinic, silence feels like pressure. If you've ever been in therapy, like it feels like pressure. But
Hmm.
in the woods, next to the beach, and on the river, silence feels like permission.
Yeah.
And people start talking around a fire in the wild when they couldn't say a word in a therapy room.
Right.
And the body remembers what the mind forgets. Walking, breathing, holding a bow. I love archery, right? Casting a fishing line. Those physical practices open up the door for what's locked inside an individual. And
Yeah.
I think the wild gets people out of their heads and
Hmm.
back into their lives because it forces you when you're in the wild, when you're outdoors, it forces you, yeah, like you can't go camping and not put up a tent. You can't go
Right.
camping out in the wild and not build a fire to keep bears away and things like that. So there's activity that you're
Mhm.
forced to do, right? And
Right.
in that way, I believe the outdoors restores perspective
Yeah.
because trauma shrinks world down to the wound,
Yeah.
right? When you experience trauma, it shrinks your world down to that wound. And what happens is the wild expands it again. Under a
Hmm.
sky full of stars, your pain feels smaller, not
Yeah.
because it disappears, but because you realize you're part of something bigger, right?
Right.
And because ritual and belonging live outdoors, right?
Hmm.
There's certain things that when you go camping, when you go outdoors, you know you have to do. There's a ritual involved, but it's
Yeah.
not like a, hey, we're going to do some rituals. It's just part of it. And for centuries, people have gone into the wild to grieve, to pray, to mark transitions, to remember. And, in my space of veterans and first responders, they step into that same stream of ritual when I take them outside. And that's
Hmm.
why I do it.
I love that. I love that. Now, give us an example of a ritual that helps repair moral injury.
Yeah. So I can give you a really good one. So um, recently I was in Montana on a bear hunt with my oldest son, and I've got a couple of battle buddies that had died by suicide. And before I walked up the mountain, before I went into the hunt, I took them with me. I wrote their name on my backpack or put it on a piece of paper and in a pocket. And along the way, I would remember them. It was a way to keep them alive. It was a way to keep them um, going.
Right.
Earlier I talked about the last things that you didn't get to say to the loved one that died by suicide. There's a ritual there. We call them rituals of remembrance, right?
Yeah.
And these are ways that we can um, remember the people, the situation. Um, and the thing about legacy in life is the way we keep people alive is we take them with us where we go, right?
Yeah.
And a part of moral injury is a deep part of that is isolation, right?
Yeah.
But
Hmm.
when we take those people with us, we refuse to allow isolation to take us over.
Yeah.
Um, we refuse to let the fracture be the identity, and
Right.
we're going to control what that looks like.
Wow. I love that. That is an amazing way of remembering somebody and keeping them close to your heart. I really I like that a lot. Now, how do we move from managing symptoms to reintegrating the self?
Yeah. Well, I first think we have to do it intentionally, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
I think that one of my biggest issues with the, I guess, the scientific model of care
Hmm.
is we focus too much on symptoms, almost so much that we miss the person.
Yeah.
So you want to know my secret? Here's my secret: presence. Just be present with people. Focus less on the symptom and more
Mhm.
about the person. The
Right.
symptoms are a result of what's going on with the person, right?
Yeah.
And so
Hmm.
I think when we talk about holistic care and we talk about person-centered care, it's not just listening to what they're saying, it's sitting with them in it.
Yeah.
That's what presence is. And I think that, when we talk about um, rituals, the ritual of naming brings
Hmm.
people into the present, right? We speak aloud something that we've carried in silence. That
Yeah.
breaks the silence. It's a ritual,
Hmm.
but here's a truth that I want to leave with you. Whatever comes out of your mouth will always silence what's in your head.
Yeah.
You can't have a thought. You can't count to 10 in your mind and then speak aloud and keep counting.
Yeah.
It's impossible. And so when we speak things out, moral injury really thrives in secrecy. So when we name the wound, we reclaim our voice, right?
Yeah.
Um, Returning to a place, going back to the woods, going back to the rivers, going back to the fields, that's where you feel safe. That's where you kind of ground your body in the natural world. And the reason
Yeah.
that helps is trauma really shrinks your world, right? But
Right.
ritual return in return expands it again and it restores that belonging. And the number thing about presence is companioning.
Hmm.
Walking side by side with someone in silence or in their story without fixing or trying to rush them.
Yeah.
Why is that important? Because moral injury isolates. But when
Hmm.
you walk with someone, you reestablish connection and dignity. Before we started our talk, I said you and I have both had leaders in our lives. We've had the leaders that sit across the desk from us, and
Hmm.
we've had leaders that came around the desk to sit with us, right?
Yeah.
And there's not a person listening that doesn't appreciate more the leader who comes and sits with them. That's the
Hmm.
type of leadership we have to bring into moral injury care because we
Yeah.
can't sit across the desk saying, oh, no, you check this box and you've got that and you need to do this. You better do this. We got to come around the desk and just say, what do
Yeah.
you need to get to tomorrow? How can
Right.
I help you be the best version of you?
Right. I like that. Now, for partners, parents, and leaders listening, how do we support someone having, someone navigating moral injury?
Yeah. Number one, don't let them do it alone.
Hmm.
Moral injury is healed in community.
Right.
It's really a community injury because it isolates us from community in the sense
Yeah.
of we don't feel like we're worthy enough to be a part of family, a part of community. The shame of moral injury tells us, eh, you don't deserve that. You're
Yeah.
not worthy of that. You're less than. And so
Hmm.
making sure that they know without judgment, you love them, you're here for them, and you're going to walk this out with them. That's the number one thing you could do. If someone is in serious distress, then National Crisis Line is 988. If someone is suicidal, if they're a veteran, you press one and it'll take you right to the National Crisis Line for veterans. That's a number that I think everybody should have programmed into their phone, so
Hmm.
that if you're in with someone in crisis, you don't just leave them in crisis. You can give them a warm handoff into care. Um, and look, be humble enough to know if it's above your pay grade.
Yeah.
Don't try and don't try and walk with someone in a crisis situation that you are not prepared for,
Yeah.
but stick with them until you hand them off.
Yeah.
Don't say, hey, go down the road and turn right and then left and then go there. No, you walk them there.
Yes.
Um, Walk them directly into an ER or into a mental health ER or whatever that they need. Um, but I think the most important thing is if you're still here, your story still matters.
Yeah.
So don't give up on it because it isn't finished yet. As long as you hold the pen,
Right.
you get to write how your story ends. Nobody else writes it for you. You get to
Right.
write how it ends. And here's a really, really strong truth. You ready for this, Stacey?
Hmm.
If you're here listening to me and Stacey, it doesn't matter the hell you've been through in your life. Right now, at this moment, you're operating at 100% success rate of being here.
Yes.
I don't know what else you operate at 100% at, but that's a pretty good one. So let's
Yeah.
figure out why. Let's figure out the why connected to that and then move into the how. I think the best thing that we can do when we walk with people is be with them until they get to their how. Most people get stuck in the why. Why did this
Mhm.
happen? Why are we going to do it? Why? And the reality is you might never know the why, but you
Right.
can know the how. The how is super important. How do I move forward? How do I survive? How do I get to another day? Those are action steps. And if you want to take action, trust me, there's people like me and Stacy and plenty of other people who want to be with you to get to your how.
Exactly. 100%. Now, if there's someone hearing this and feels seen, what's the first step they can take today?
First step you can take today is talk to somebody about what it is you're feeling. You know, if you feel like you have moral injury, then find a good therapist, a good pastor, a good chaplain. You know, it doesn't have to be anybody professional. It just needs to be somebody you trust and that you
Hmm.
know is a safe space that is not
Yes.
going to hold anything you say in judgment, and they're not
Hmm.
going to try and fix you. They're going to
Right.
walk with you. They're going to companion you. That's the number one thing. Do not navigate life alone. We weren't designed to be alone. As a
Right.
matter of fact, when, in Christian tradition, when God made everything in Genesis, there was one thing that displeased him, and that's that man was alone. We are not designed to be alone. That's why loneliness is the worst risk factor that any of us can have. And I'm not
Yeah.
talking about, the sense of being alone. I'm talking about being in a crowded room and feeling like you're alone. If
Yeah.
you're there, you're in trouble. Reach out. Take the first step. Do not do this alone. Find
Yeah.
somebody to talk with.
Hmm. 100%. Now, you've written a book. Can you tell us about that book?
Yeah, 100%, man. Healing in the wild is really, it's my model of self-care. It's what has gotten me through adverse childhood experiences from a young man all the way through my experiences in the military to even today. It is using outdoors to overcome trauma and loss. And here's
Hmm.
one thing that I promise you. Loss is the common connector of all experiences, especially
Yes.
trauma. It doesn't matter what trauma you've been through, loss
Right.
is connected to it. And so learning how to deal with loss is super important. So what I did is I took my model of care, and when I wrote my dissertation, it was called Hunt Therapy. And so I have a website, www.hunttherapy.org, and there's one T. And when you hear the word hunt, I don't want you to think the killing and harvesting of animals. What I want you to think about is, what do you need to hunt after for purpose in your life? We
Hmm.
all need purpose. As a matter of fact, you show me someone that has purpose in life, and I'll show you someone who has the ability to navigate very complex things in life, almost like they don't exist. Not saying it's not going to, we all go through stuff, we all have problems. But when you have purpose, man, it's a lot easier to navigate life. But you showed me someone who doesn't have purpose. And I'll show
Hmm.
you someone who's on the slippery slope of thinking that the world would be better off without them. So when I
Right.
wrote Hunt Therapy, I just really took my model of self-care, what I used as a veteran myself, just working through my stuff. And I wanted to create something that I felt like the universe could universally take and it would work for them. And so you got Healing in the Wild, where we use nature as a pathway to recover from trauma. And the cool thing is, my book right now is being translated into Arabic by a group of Muslim psychiatrists in Germany to then be sent into Syria and areas in the Middle East to help the Muslim communities and refugees that are displaced from being at their homes. Right? Places where they love, moral injury, right? And being moved all over the world. And
Yeah.
it's going to be used for the same sense with my vets. It's going to be used to help them find purpose and recover from loss and significant loss. And so that's what Healing in the Wild is. It's a different way. You're not going to find in Healing in the Wild, it's not a religious book. It's a very
Hmm.
practical book that is going to show you ways of breath work and mindfulness and some of the rituals that we talked about, taking people with you, rituals of remembrance. You're going to find things that traditional mental health don't do. You're going to find pathways of moral health that are more about meaning, identity, and integrity of self. And
Yeah.
so, you know, what I always say is, the way I write is not, hey, I'm Dr. Carter Check. You better listen to me because I'm the smartest person in the room. And if you don't listen to me, your life is going to be terrible. First of all, I don't like people like that.
Yeah.
Second of all, I don't allow people like that to even speak to me.
Right.
What you are going to get is you're just going to get an authentic guy who's been through some stuff that might have some integrity and knowledge. Well, I do have integrity, but might have some knowledge about things that are connected to significant loss and maybe
Hmm.
some tools. And as we walk along the creek, as we walk down to the beach, as we take a hike up the mountain, maybe we share collectively some stories. Maybe you're able to glean something from my experience. And
Right.
hopefully, my instructional memoir, I guess we could say, will
Hmm.
give you some practical tools and some takeaways that can help you overcome your loss, help you deal with your trauma, and definitely help you deal with the violations of what was right to you, the moral injury that maybe you suffer from. I talk a lot about ambiguous loss and disenfranchised grief because these are the types of wounds that don't get enough attention, right?
Yeah.
We don't have funerals for miscarried babies that we had. We don't have funerals for abuse of parents that
Hmm.
we had in life. And what I want to try and do is give you a language, not just to identify things, but to give you in a language that once you can identify things, then you can form your own language on how you heal from there forward.
Right. I love that. Now, where can people find this book?
Yeah, there's a couple of places. You can go to my personal website, www.drcartercheck.com, and that's drcartercheck.com. Or you can also go to healinginthewild.com. You can find my book on Amazon. It's almost every audio platform. If you've enjoyed listening to me today, go get it on audio. If you haven't enjoyed listening to me today, get the book and read it. Okay. But it's it's my life story. It's my gift to the universe. At least I hope it is.
Yeah.
And it's for one reason. I believe my design professionally and personally is to keep people alive.
Yeah.
And that's not by pointing out flaws. It's by giving them tools. It's by giving them resources and showing them that there is a pathway forward that doesn't lead to death.
I love that. Now, if you had to take today's conversation and you wanted to emphasize on a couple important factors, what are some things that you'd like to emphasize that you'd like the listeners to walk away with?
Yeah. The deepest wounds, they aren't visible. The ones carried in silence and the wounds that are in the silence, those are the ones that need a voice. Moral health asks what's wrong. Well, mental health asks what's wrong with you.
Hmm.
Moral health asks what still matters to you.
Yeah.
And that's important. That's where healing begins. It's not about what's wrong with you, it's what still matters to you, because whatever matters to you is going to catapult you into wanting the best version of you. When we
Right.
talk about suicide prevention, we don't stop suicide by only studying death. We stop
Hmm.
suicide by restoring reasons to live. That's
Yeah.
super important. On nature, in the wild, silence isn't empty, it's safe. It's where many of us remember who we are. Go into the wild and check it out. And the last, if you're still here, your story still matters. Don't give up on it because
Right.
it isn't finished yet. You get to write how it ends.
I love it. I love it. Well, this has been amazing, Dr. Carter. Thank you so much for coming on the show. This is a topic we don't usually talk about too much, but I wish more people would come on the show and talk about, preventing suicide and moral injury and how to overcome it. And, because I think, if people knew different ways that they could cope with some of the pain that they're dealing with inside and not give up on life and realize that there are things that matter, that they have purpose and learn how to find that purpose, we could save so many lives. And that's what we want to do. And I'm so glad there's people like you out there showing people and giving people direction and helping people find purpose and find what matters in their life and realize that they are more than what they think and that they don't lack. They're not that they are worthy and that, they have meaningful purpose in life, and that they're good people, and that, and that they have a reason to live. And I thank you so much for what you're doing, because there's so many suicide deaths each year, and people are not even aware of it. And, and even in the military, the vets, communities with diseases and disorders, stress, pain, everything. There are high levels of suicide for all different reasons, but people just don't know how to cope, and they don't know what to do. And they isolate themselves, and that pain just grows bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point where they find no meaning in life, and what's the purpose? And we don't want people to get to that point. So I thank you so much for doing what you're doing, and you are just truly a wonderful individual, and thank you again and again and again.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having the courage and the desire to create a platform like this so people like me can come collaborate with you. So, thank you for what you do in this space. And thank you and your audience for allowing me to share. And I truly hope that it inspires someone to keep living.
Yes, 100%. Thank you so much, Dr. Carter. You have a wonderful day.
You too.